Logan Wright knocked on the pale blue door for the 400th time. A paper bag of prescriptions in one hand, a warm loaf of fresh sourdough bread in the other. It was exactly 6:15 p.m. Same as always. But tonight, as his knuckles hit the wood, he heard footsteps he didn't recognize from inside the house. They were quick, sharp, and precise, the heavy click of high heels on hardwood. It was nothing like Evelyn's slow, familiar shuffle. The door swung open. Victoria Sterling stood in the frame, wearing a charcoal gray tailored designer suit. A smartphone was pressed to her ear, but the words died instantly in her throat. The woman who had corporate signed his termination letter exactly 10 months ago froze, staring at the man she never expected to see again. Not in a high-rise boardroom in the downtown Chicago, but on her own grandmother's porch in the quiet town of Fairport, Ohio. Neither of them moved. A heavy, suffocating silence fell between them. Before you keep watching, guess who opens that door tomorrow morning? Some answers you won't see coming. 6 weeks earlier, Fairport still smelled like late summer. Logan managed the maintenance office at Briarwood Apartments, a squat, 3-story brick building 3 streets over from Maple Avenue. He fixed leaking faucets, patched drywall, and replaced the flickering bulbs in the stairwells. It was a simple, quiet life. It was definitely not the life anyone would have guessed for him. Not from the way he carried himself, and not from the way he spoke, careful, precise, like a man used to managing million-dollar operational budgets. But nobody at Briarwood asked about his past, and he never offered it. His 9-year-old daughter, Grace, was his entire world. She was missing her 2 front teeth and spent every afternoon sketching detailed drawings in the margins of her homework. Every morning, Logan walked her the 6 blocks to Fairport Elementary, and every morning on the way back, he stopped at the cozy house with the pale blue door. It had all started with a soccer ball 6 months ago. Grace had kicked it too hard in the side yard, and it had rolled straight into Evelyn's prized rose bed, flattening 3 rare stems. Evelyn had come out onto her porch, 76 years old, but sharp as a tack. Instead of scolding the little girl, she had laughed until she had to sit down. Logan had run over to apologize, ended up staying for coffee, and hadn't missed a single morning since. Evelyn lived completely alone. Her husband had been gone for 11 years, and her son had moved out west and rarely called. She managed fine, she always said, but she loved the company. A jar lid she couldn't twist, a porch light that needed changing, a prescription she'd rather not drive for anymore. Logan never made her ask twice. "You spoil me, Logan," she had told him one morning, watching him replace the batteries in her kitchen smoke detector. "You feed my kid homemade banana bread every week, Evelyn," Logan smiled, tightening a screw. "I think we're square." Logan loved Fairport because nobody here knew what he used to be. He never brought it up to anyone. As far as this town was concerned, Logan Wright had always fixed leaky faucets for a living, and that was perfectly fine by him. But some nights, after Grace went to sleep, Logan would look into the hall closet at the cardboard boxes he still hadn't unpacked since their sudden move. One night, while looking for packing tape, his fingers caught the edge of a stiff plastic card wedged beneath old insurance papers. He pulled it out. A laminated corporate badge stared back at him. His own face looked younger, clean-shaven. In the corner was a prominent corporate logo, Sterling Aerospace. Underneath, in bold block letters, it read, Senior Structural Safety Engineer. The memories came rushing back all at once, hitting him like a physical blow. 11 years at Sterling Aerospace, the last 3 running the structural safety review line for commercial aircraft wing components. And then, the fateful night, he found the fatigue stress numbers that didn't add up. Numbers that meant a massive batch of load-bearing components had been cleared for production without meeting federal specifications. He remembered filing the urgent safety report. He remembered the cold, terrifying silence of his supervisor, Julian Cross. Within 2 weeks, internal sensitive company data that Logan had never even touched was suddenly flagged under his user login. He was framed. The termination letter followed immediately, with a neat, authoritative signature at the bottom. Victoria Sterling, Chief Executive Officer. He remembered standing in the parking lot with a cardboard box, watching people he'd worked with for a decade suddenly pretend to look at their phones. Nobody asked for his side of the story. A signature on a corporate letter had done all the talking, and everyone simply believed the lie. Logan looked at the badge one last time, feeling the sharp plastic corners bite into his palm. Then, he threw it deep into the kitchen trash can, under the wet coffee grounds. He didn't want his daughter to see it. He didn't sleep that night. But when 6 a.m. came, he made coffee, packed Grace's lunch, and walked her to school before turning toward Maple Street with a bag of groceries. Because whatever that badge had once meant, it had nothing to do with the sweet old lady waiting for her bread 3 blocks away. But some mornings start like every other morning. This one wouldn't stay that way. Victoria Sterling had not planned on being in Fairport that morning. A critical board meeting in Chicago had collapsed at the last minute when Julian Cross, her chief operating officer, cited a scheduling conflict that felt far thinner than he probably intended. Rather than sit in her glass-walled office rereading the same dreary quarterly slides, she'd gotten in her car and driven 40 minutes down Route 9 to her grandmother's house, a promise she kept making to herself and never quite managed to keep. She hadn't called ahead. Evelyn never minded surprises. Victoria had let herself in with her spare key, calling out as she crossed the hallway, and was halfway to the kitchen when the knock came at the front door. It was soft, familiar, timed to the exact second. Though Victoria had no way of knowing that, she had turned back and opened the door without thinking, her phone still pressed to her ear, mid-sentence to her secretary about a contract clause that suddenly stopped mattering. The man on the porch went completely rigid. Victoria went rigid a half-second after him. Logan Wright, bread in one hand, a small paper bag of medication in the other, standing on her grandmother's welcome mat like he belonged there. Because, as it turned out, he did. "Victoria, is that Logan?" Evelyn's cheerful voice came from the kitchen, delighted and clear. "Oh, you two are finally meeting properly." Neither of them answered right away. Logan's dark eyes found Victoria's and held them. A silent, heavy question passed between them, faster than either of them could have explained. "How much does she know? How much do I say?" "Not here," Logan's steady gaze seemed to say. "Not like this?" Evelyn appeared in the hallway, wiping flour from her hands onto her floral apron, beaming at both of them like she had engineered the entire moment herself. "Logan, this is my granddaughter, Victoria, the one I'm always talking your ear off about. Victoria, this is the young man who's been keeping me company and looking after me every single morning for months. I don't know what I'd do without him." Victoria started, her voice catching, then stopped. "We've run into each other," Logan said, his tone perfectly even, unhurried and calm, the exact same voice he used to talk his daughter down from a tantrum. "Small town, paths cross." Victoria's eyes flicked to him again, a wave of profound confusion and guilt moving behind them. She swallowed hard, then forced her professional footing. "Right. A few times, actually." The lie came out smoother than she expected, though her heart was hammering against her ribs. Evelyn looked between them, thoroughly satisfied, entirely unaware that she was standing at the epicenter of a quiet storm. "Well, good. I've been wanting you two to meet for ages. Logan, you're staying for dinner. Both of you. I made too much roast chicken and I refuse to eat it alone for the 3rd night this week." It wasn't a question. It never was with Evelyn. She was already bustling back toward the stove, humming a soft tune. Victoria watched her grandmother go, then glanced at Logan, who gave a small, resigned shrug, the kind that said, "You know how she is? There's no arguing with her." It struck Victoria, standing there in the hallway with her designer heels still on and her phone finally silent in her pocket, how easily this modest house made decisions for people. Nobody in this kitchen had ever asked her permission for anything, and somehow, that didn't bother her the way it usually did. Victoria opened her mouth to decline. She had 4 hours of urgent work waiting on her laptop, a dozen calls to make, a dozen reasons to leave, yet none of them came out. "Sure," she said instead, watching Logan set the fresh bread on the counter like he had done it 100 times before. "I'd like that." Logan didn't look at her again until Evelyn had turned her back, and when he did, there was no anger in his face. It was something far more dangerous, a quiet, assessing look of a man recalculating in real time exactly how much ground he was standing on. Dinner ran 2 hours longer than Victoria had planned, and every minute of it felt like walking across thin ice. Evelyn did most of the talking, sharing stories about Logan fixing the porch step, about Grace's drawings taped to the refrigerator, and about how Logan had quietly rehung the heavy storm door. Victoria laughed in the right places. asked the right questions, but felt like she was performing a cardboard version of herself. "So, what is it you do exactly, Victoria?" 9-year-old Grace asked at one point, her legs swinging under her chair, completely without malice. "Grandma Evelyn says you work at a big office." "I do," Victoria said, feeling Logan's eyes on her, though she kept her gaze on her plate. "Boring stuff. Paperwork, mostly." It wasn't a lie, but it was everything true left unsaid. Logan smoothly steered the conversation elsewhere with the practiced ease of a single father, making a joke about Grace's homework, asking Evelyn about her garden. Victoria found herself deeply grateful for his mercy, though she didn't want to examine why she drove home to Chicago that night, with both hands tight on the steering wheel, replaying every second of the evening. The moment she reached her apartment, she bypassed her kitchen, ignored her emails, and pulled up the employee archive on her secure laptop. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard for a long, trembling moment before she typed the name. Wright, Logan. The termination file was incredibly thin, much thinner than she remembered signing off on. She read it twice. Data mishandling. Unauthorized access to proprietary safety files. Immediate termination for cause. Her own signature sat at the bottom of the document. It was dated 10 months ago. A decision she had made in an 11-minute meeting with Julian Cross, standing over her shoulder, telling her it was urgent, that Logan was a rogue employee trying to tank the company's timeline. She had believed Julian. She hadn't asked questions. She closed the laptop slowly. The cold, clinical file did not match the man who opened jars for her grandmother, who spoke to his daughter with infinite patience, and who had looked her in the eyes without a single trace of fear. The mismatch sat heavy and uneasy in her chest. She needed to know the truth, but she couldn't ask Julian, not yet. Something told her that if she started digging publicly, the people involved would bury the evidence. She had to do this quietly. She had to find out what really happened 10 months ago. In the weeks that followed, Victoria started finding reasons to drive to Fairport. She told herself it was overdue, that Evelyn deserved more than 10-minute Sunday phone calls. And that much was true. But she couldn't pretend, not fully, that some part of her drive wasn't shaped around the hour Logan usually came by. She began arriving in the low light of early evening, the exact time he'd stop in after his shift at the apartment complex to check the porch railing or bring over a covered dish Grace had helped make. From the kitchen window, Victoria watched him. She saw the way he crouched down to Grace's eye level instead of talking down to her. She saw the way he quietly rehung Evelyn's heavy storm door without being asked, checking the hinges twice before he called it finished. None of it matched the clinical words sitting in his personnel file, terminated for cause. The mismatch sat like a cold stone in her chest every single time she looked at him. One evening, while clearing plates together, while Evelyn dozed in her armchair and Grace colored at the table, Victoria found herself standing close enough to Logan that she had to lower her voice to keep the question private. "Do you hate me?" she asked, keeping her eyes fixed on the soapy dishwater. Logan didn't pretend not to understand. He didn't even flinch. He dried a glass cup with slow, deliberate movements. "I don't have room left for that," he said, his voice flat. Not with a 9-year-old to raise. It wasn't forgiveness. It landed much harder than an outright accusation would have. "That's not an answer," Victoria whispered, finally looking up at him. "It's the only one I've got right now," Logan replied. He set the dried glass down, turned, and met her eyes with a gaze that made her feel entirely transparent. "You want a different one? You're going to have to earn it." Those words haunted Victoria the entire drive back to Chicago. You're going to have to earn it. The next morning, the moment she walked into the high-rise office of Sterling Aerospace, she bypassed her own executive assistant and went straight to the cubicle of Donna Reyes, the senior document archivist who had been with the company for 15 years. "Donna," Victoria said, closing the office door behind her, "I need everything on the Logan Wright termination. Every email, every draft of his structural safety report, and anything that touched Julian Cross's inbox in the 2 weeks before it happened. Don't route this through legal, bring it directly to me." Donna's hand went completely still on her keyboard. She looked up, her face draining of color. For 10 months, Donna had carried a crushing secret. She had 2 kids at home and a mortgage, and Julian Cross had made it very clear, in that quiet, threatening corporate way of his, that certain files were better left buried. But looking at Victoria's determined expression, Donna realized the wind was changing. "Understood," Donna whispered. "I'll bring it to your office after hours." At 6:30 p.m., when the executive floor was completely dark and empty, Donna slipped into Victoria's office and placed a thick manila folder on her desk. "What is this?" Victoria asked. "Everything you asked for," Donna said, her voice trembling slightly. "And the one thing you didn't." Victoria opened the folder. Resting right on top was a printed email chain dated 14 months ago, 4 months before Logan was fired, from Julian Cross, COO, to Production Engineering Team. Subject, Margin Optimization. We need to trim the material tolerance margins on the wing spar composite batch by 11% to hit our quarterly cost targets. Flagging now that the Safety Review Office, Logan Wright's team, will need to be managed. 2 pages later was the second thread. Logan's original, unaltered safety report, flagging the exact 11% failure, and immediately beneath it, an internal message from Julian to HR, drafting the fake data breach complaint against Logan, calling him a liability to the timeline. Victoria read the pages 3 times. The room felt suddenly devoid of oxygen. "He never leaked anything," Victoria said, her voice barely a whisper. "He found what Julian was hiding, and I signed the paper that ruined his life." "I was terrified, Victoria," Donna said, tears welling in her eyes. "Julian threatened to blacklist me from the industry. I'm so sorry." Victoria looked up, the corporate mask completely gone from her face. "You just did the hardest part, Donna. Thank you." When Donna left, Victoria sat alone in the dark office, looking out at the glittering Chicago skyline. The full weight of her failure as a leader crushed down on her. She hadn't just made a mistake. She had let a corrupt executive dismantle an honest man's life to protect a profit margin. She pulled out her phone and dialed Logan's number before she could talk herself out of it. "I found the reports," Victoria said when he answered. "I have the emails from Julian. I need to see you. Not at Evelyn's, just you." There was a long, agonizing silence on the other end of the line. "Tomorrow," Logan said finally, "after Grace is at school." The following morning, Logan was waiting for Victoria outside the school gates after dropping Grace off. The crisp autumn air bit at his face, but his expression remained perfectly calm. When Victoria pulled up in her car, her eyes were red from a sleepless night, and she was clutching the manila folder like a lifeline. She got out and walked over to him. "I have everything," she said, her voice tight. The altered stress test numbers, the email threads where Julian ordered the production team to compromise the safety margins, and his private HR file framing you. "I'm going to the board today. I want you to be there." Logan looked at the folder, then back up at her. He didn't look victorious, just deeply, quietly tired. "I didn't think you'd find it," he admitted. "I should have looked 10 months ago," Victoria said. "I owe you your life back, Logan. Let's go finish this." At 10 a.m., the boardroom at Sterling Aerospace was dead silent. Julian Cross was already seated at the massive mahogany table, laughing and chatting with 2 of the senior board members, completely relaxed. He had no idea what was coming. The heavy double doors swung open, and Victoria entered, followed closely by Logan, who was still wearing his Briarwood maintenance jacket, and Donna Reyes. Julian's laughter died instantly. His face went incredibly pale, then flushed a furious red. He stood up, slamming his hands on the table. "Victoria, what is the meaning of this? Why is a terminated, disgraced employee standing in our executive suite? Security should—" "Sit down, Julian," Victoria interrupted, her voice cutting through the room like a steel blade. She didn't wait. She laid the printed emails and safety reports across the table, sliding them directly to the board members. One by one, the directors began reading. 14 months ago, Victoria announced, her voice echoing off the glass walls, "Our COO, Julian Cross, ordered a reduction in structural safety margins on our wing spar composite line by 11% to hit his quarterly cost targets." When Logan Wright flagged this critical safety failure, as his job required, Julian spent the next 3 weeks building a fake data leak case to frame him. He had his user login compromised and drafted a termination for cause. "This is absurd," Julian hissed, his eyes darting frantically around the room. "You're taking the word of a disgruntled ex-employee who couldn't even keep a real job? This is a conspiracy." I'm taking the word of your own digital signature, Julian, Victoria said, sliding the final page across the table. Sent from your private corporate account, time-stamped weeks before Logan's departure was ever officially discussed. Julian's composure completely shattered. He glared at Donna Reyes, who stood by the door, but Donna held her ground. You want to talk about conspiracy? Julian sneered, turning his venom directly on Victoria. How is the board going to feel when they find out their golden CEO has been secretly having dinner with the man she fired at her grandmother's house every week? How is that going to look in the press, Victoria? You'd better be very careful who you're trying to expose. The threat hung heavily in the air. For a moment, the board members muttered among themselves. Julian thought he had won. But then, Logan stepped forward. He placed his own manila folder on the table. This is the original structural review report, Logan said, his calm, deep voice completely commanding the room. Every single fatiguing stress value in here is backed up by raw test data from the machinery. If you audit the physically archived logs from the factory floor, which Julian couldn't delete, you will find they match this copy down to the decimal. I didn't come here for a corporate war, Julian. I came because those wings are currently holding up commercial flights, and people could have died. The board members looked at the data. The silence in the room was absolute. One of the elder directors looked up at Julian, then at Victoria. I call for an immediate vote on Julian Cross's suspension and a full federal safety audit. The vote wasn't even close. Julian was stripped of his corporate access on the spot. Within 30 minutes, security escorted him out of the building, his angry shouting echoing down the corridor as he was walked to the parking lot. After the boardroom cleared, Logan stood by the floor-to-ceiling glass window, looking out over the Chicago skyline. He felt a sudden, massive weight lift from his chest, a quiet, powerful relief. Victoria walked up and stood beside him. Thank you, she said softly, for coming, and for saving this company from ourselves. I didn't do it for the company, Logan said, turning his head to look at her. I did it because it was the truth. I know, Victoria smiled, and that's why you're the only person I trust to run our safety division. The board wants to offer you your old job back, Logan, Senior Director of Structural Safety, with full back pay for the last 10 months, a public correction of your record, and direct reporting authority to me. Logan stayed silent for a long moment, looking down at his rough hands. I'm not saying yes today, he said quietly. 10 months of fixing faucets and wondering if I'd be able to buy groceries doesn't disappear in one morning. I need some time. Take all the time you need, Victoria said softly. That evening, they drove to Maple Street separately, arriving within minutes of each other under the warm yellow porch light of the pale blue door. Evelyn listened to the entire story without interrupting. She heard about the reports, the betrayal, the boardroom showdown, and how they had lied to her about how they originally met. When they finished, Evelyn sat back in her armchair, completely silent. Victoria held her breath, worried she had upset her. Suddenly, Evelyn let out a rich, delighted laugh. So, this whole time, she chuckled, shaking her head, you two have been sitting at my table, pretending to be strangers just to spare an old woman's feelings? We didn't want to bring the corporate mess into your home, Grandma, Victoria said gently. Oh, bless both of your hearts, Evelyn smiled, taking a sip of her tea. I've been telling everyone at church what a lovely coincidence it was. Well, I suppose it still is a lovely coincidence, just a much more dramatic one. In the weeks that followed, the evenings at the house with the pale blue door stopped needing a script. Victoria showed up without warning, leaving her corporate phone face down on the counter. Logan stopped watching his words so carefully. What was left once the corporate pretending fell away was a deep, quiet trust. One evening, Grace drew a new picture at the kitchen table and taped it to Evelyn's refrigerator. It showed 4 figures standing hand in hand around a wooden table: Logan, Grace, Evelyn, and Victoria. Logan dried his hands on a kitchen towel and stood looking at the drawing for a long time. Victoria walked up beside him. Are you okay? She asked quietly. Without a word, Logan reached out, found Victoria's hand, and gently squeezed it. No grand speeches were needed. They had both survived the storm, and they were finally standing on solid ground.